health and rights. Right, great. So the recording is also in progress. So let's just move on to the next slide. So what exactly is meaningful and inclusive youth participation, and why is it so important? I think Melodi already raised the issue. I think some of us know what meaningful youth participation is. I saw a lot of expertise coming in through the Menti slides, but why is it so important? What does it mean? Let's start with the basics first before we actually get to the how. So meaningful and inclusive youth participation essentially means that young people can participate on equal terms with adults or even work independently in organizations and in all stages of programming and policy making. So it's essentially taking along young people and making sure that they're participating at every level, every step of the decision making. So for example, if you're looking at the program cycle, this really means the first step, which is designing the program. The second step would be implementation, and then also including them in monitoring and evaluating the program. And then the program cycle starts again. But we want to make sure that young people have a voice, have decision-making, are participating in these decisions at every step of the way. But of course, although it's a very important concept, it's not that easy to explain all the time, especially for young people. It can be a little hard to grasp. And this is why Choice has developed a tool which helps you to understand participation, but also how can you use meaningful youth participation in your work? How can you use it to strengthen MIYP in your organization or program further? We'll get a glimpse of the flower if we go to the next, one more time, exactly. So you see, this is our beautiful flower here. And essentially, the idea behind this is that we have used the metaphor of a blooming flower to show how MIYP within an organization can exist and be strengthened if there's specific measures and specific mechanisms in place. So we'll be deep diving a little bit into the flower in just a minute. But before that, of course, I also want to conclude by saying that, MIYP is also a human right. It's really the right of young people to be included in decision-making. But ultimately, it also benefits society as a whole. Meaningful youth participation not only develops the capacity and skills of young people, but you're also investing in a future generation. So it also really helps build society. So I'll stop there, of course, because we're now really going to get into the interactive part of this presentation today. And as Melodi mentioned, we have organized a fun quiz for you. It's going to be fun, but hopefully also challenging. So we'll kind of exercise your brain muscles a little bit. And so we'll start with the quiz on Menti. I'm going to pass it on to Melodi again. I think she's going to take us through the methodology a little bit.
Yes, so you can keep Menti on for the entire meeting, actually. Also for the Q&As, for some speakers, we're going to use Menti. And we're just going to use Annotate. I'll get to that. We might be stretching you a little bit in the digital tools we're using, but it's all for inspiration, not only on the content, but also a little bit on the tools that we use. We have two little questions for you. Then Pragya is going to take you through some cases that also interactiveness we're going to assess together. And then we have two more questions again for you before giving you the floor to ask questions. Maybe good to know if during the presentation of Pragya, you do have some clarifying questions or anything, do put them in the chat. And if you think it's really relevant to actually interrupt her, then we could do that still. And if you think we can leave it to a later moment to answer, we'll do it then. So now I see that 20 people have joined in very fun icons for our first question. And the first one, I'll wait a little bit more. And again, if you're not in this, you can still play along, but you're just not going for the big prize. The question, if correct, is showing, how do you define young people? And there is 4 options coming. You have 20 seconds to answer. And maybe it's not even a really hard one, but just trying to see who's in the room. Ooh, quite a lot of people have actually said 19 to 24. I'm really happy that's not the correct answer, because that would mean I'm also old already. So I'm happy the answer is that it the definition varies. Pragya, something to add on to this?
Yeah, I see it's very interesting. I see an interesting discrepancy, of course. As a lot of people said 24 years old, but in our experience, actually, because young people are not a homogeneous set of people. Of course, different contexts, different cultures have their own definition of young people. It's very interesting. For example, if you go to the African region, you'll find that the definition of young people is actually broader than 24 years old. There actually you'll find that young people under the age of 35-year-old are considered youth. And so it differs from place to place, it differs from context to context. So actually there's no one definition of young people. So yeah, I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting what you said, that it's on the age, but it's in general, indeed, young people is quite a really big group to have it be boxed in any certain way. But before moving then to is it working? Yeah, to one more question before we move to the cases, to get you a bit of a taster of what are cases. A true or false, youth participation is a human right. Of course, we all find it super important, but is it an actual human right for youth to participate? Do you think it's true or is it false? Or do we have a new thing on the advocacy agenda? Ooh. Yeah, Pragya.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see. The room is quite divided. A lot of people said false, a lot of people said true. Well, the very important fact is that it is indeed a human right. I think I also mentioned it at the beginning of today's presentation. So actually, youth participation is guaranteed under the United Nations Convention on the Child Rights, and it's actually Article 12. So that's a good important fact to know if you are talking about youth participation. So it is indeed a human right for young people.
So more than a very important and relevant topic, it's actually on human rights that we need to find out how to implement it. So now again, we are swapping, we are kind of really stretching your brains. Now we're going back to the PowerPoint and we're going to use one new tool. That's the last one, I promise you, on Zoom, but it might also be an interesting one that you could use even more often. So I'm gonna give the power play back to Alexander. What we want to do now with you is that, as I said, I think we can talk quite a long time about MIYP, and we can also talk about what is tokenistic and that we really want everything to be meaningful. But sometimes it's quite hard to describe why it's tokenistic. Even it might feel like it, or it's not really meaningful. So Pragya will take you through it, but in the flower, there are 5 important elements. You can see it in the horizontal axis, which is the freedom of choice, information, voice, responsibility, and decision-making power. Here is a random graph on a case. And what we want you to do is she's going to take you through 5 cases. And with each case, while she's explaining, we want you to actually assess what you think in that case. How much is there is the freedom of choice present? Is it not present at all? Is it present to a very high level, or anywhere in between? And anyone can just do this, and we're going to do it in the following way. We'll go to the next slide, and for everyone that is in the Zoom meeting, if you look at the top of your screen, you see a green thing saying you are viewing Alexander's screen, and then right to it, it says view options. If you click view options, Alexander, if you can go to the next slide, then you see annotates. So here you can see it. Go to the top, click view options, and then click annotate. And if correct, you should be able to get yourself a pencil and start drawing. You can start doodling already so that we can see if people are able to do so. Great. Yes. Draw whatever you want. You can also put a stamp. This is your child moment. You have all creativity for around 20 more seconds. And then what we're going to do is at each case, first, Pragya will explain the case. Then with each case, you will still see the case, but you will also see the graph. And we want everyone to draw a line at the point or mark a cross or whatever to the point where you think to what extent it is there. The freedom of choice, the voice, the responsibility, any of the exits. We have 5 times to try. And this is more about finding out how you can actually assess this. So I'm going to get now clear all of your beautiful drawings. Yeah. And we can continue to the first case, Pragya. First, the flower.
Yes. Exactly. Before we actually move on to the case, it's possible that not everyone is familiar with the flower of participation. So, well, usually we do this in a 3-day training. Today, I'm going to explain the flower in 5 minutes. So please bear with me. But essentially, as I already told you, the flower is a great tool to understand meaningful youth participation, but also understand, what are the core components that make participation so meaningful. And the better you understand these components, the easier it is to understand how you can strengthen it or implement it in your programs or organizations. So we really start from the bottom of the flower. So we start from the soil. Without the soil, of course, there's no place to put the flower. The flower wouldn't exist. And the soil actually represents commitment from young people. So that's really essential, but I don't think there's any lack of commitment from young people today. As we move on to the next core component, we come to the roots. The stronger the roots go into the soil, the stronger the flower gets, the higher it grows. And so the roots comprise of the core elements of meaningful youth participation. And as Melodi already took us through it in the graphs, there are 5 core elements of the flower. The first one is freedom of choice. The second one is information. The third one is voice. The fourth one is responsibility, and the fifth one is decision-making power. And so the stronger these core elements are, the higher or stronger meaningful youth participation exists in your organization or program. And then moving on to the body of the flower, of course, we see the beautiful petals and the leaves, and these actually represent the different forms of meaningful youth participation. It's good to keep in mind that there's no one solution fits all strategy when it comes to MYP. There's multiple ways, there's multiple approaches to meaningful youth participation. And so it really depends on your context, it depends on your needs, it depends on the needs of the young people you're working with. So there's many different forms of youth participation. So as you see on the petals represent, as we like to call them, the higher levels of MYP, and the leaves represent the lower levels of MYP. So for example, as you see on the petals, you have youth adult partnerships. Another form of MYP is where young people are in the lead, so youth-led, but where adults have no decision-making power at all. It's completely youth-led. Another form is youth-led, but some of the decisions might be shared with adults. And another one is adult-led. I think most of your organizations are currently, but where there are some shared decisions with young people. And then at the petals, you'll see there's 2 lower levels of MYP, and this is where young people do not have a lot of decision-making power. But young people can be appointed a role and informed about it, or young people can also be consulted and informed. And the difference between these different forms of participation actually depends on what level, to what extent the core elements are present in an organization or program. And so this is what we're going to experiment a little with using the case studies. You might also be wondering, what are those 2 insects or ants doing on the flower? Well, insects, as you know, eat the flower or eat plants. And in this case, these insects represent the not so meaningful forms of participation because they also unfortunately exist. And I saw also in the Menti that you have tokenism and manipulation coming up a lot. So I imagine a lot of you have some information or knowledge about what that means, but we'll also dive into it and play with that concept a little bit using the different case studies. And then lastly, of course, meaningful participation cannot really exist without some preconditions. And so, of course, it's very important for a flower to have water, to have air, and also to have sun. And so this is represented by capacity strengthening, inclusive environment, and an enabling environment for young people. And without this, the flower actually would rather die. So it's also really important that we have certain preconditions in place for the flower to flourish. So that was a very quick 5-minute introduction to the flower. If you are interested to read more about this, we have the narrative of the flower available on our website. We'll also be sharing that with you at the end of the session, so hang on to your seats. And now we'll move on to the case studies. All right, so case 1 coming up. I'm going to read it out, but you can also take your time and read it on your screens. And so the case 1 is about Nino, who is an 18-year-old young person. So Nino is an 18-year-old living in a community with a high prevalence of HIV. An elderly person invites Nino for a meeting where they are going to discuss the development of a new health center and want a young person to attend this meeting. Nino agrees, but asks for some more information about the NGO, from the NGO. That's too difficult for you to understand, Nino. It's just a presentation about the new health center. That's all you need to know, says the elderly in response. When Nino comes to the meeting, there seems to be 30 adults in the room, and the chair is only willing to give you limited opportunity to voice your opinion, and your views are also easily dismissed by the chair of the meeting. Now, can we show the flower one more time? So just to kind of recap, take a look at the different forms of meaningful youth participation. As I explained it, the petals and the leaves are the meaningful forms. The ants are the not so meaningful forms. And then what we want you to address is, if you look at the core elements, so freedom of choice, information, voice, responsibility, and decision-making power, to what extent are these different core elements present in this particular case? And if we go to the next slide, you'll be able to use annotate, as the Melody explained, and you should be able to draw where do you think, to what extent do you think each of these elements is present in this particular case? So let's give you some time to try. See some responses coming in. If you're having trouble with annotation, please also feel free to use the chat. So I see freedom of choice. A lot of people have said it is not present at all, or it's present to a very low extent. The same thing for information, it's either not present at all or present to a very low extent.
I like that responsibility and decision-making is even below 0.
Yeah, it's like -10.
For some people, you can also click redo and undo. I see some people, maybe if you make a mistake, that's okay, just redo or yeah, but interesting to see.
Yeah, indeed. And maybe if I can open the floor or open the chat, if anybody wants to kind of respond to what, in your opinion, do you think is this form of participation?
So what are the options, Pragya? We have manipulation and tokenism, that the not good forms. Then we have.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So you have the non-meaningful and the meaningful forms. So of course, under non-meaningful, you have manipulation and tokenism. Then under meaningful forms, you have youth-led decisions shared with adults. You have adult-led decisions shared with young people. You have completely youth-led form of MIYP. And then you have also youth-adult partnerships where there's equal decision-making power. So what, in your opinion, what kind of form of participation is this? I think you know the answer, because as you can see, the all of the elements are actually not present at all or present to a very low extent, especially when it comes to decision-making power, and responsibility, which is actually even lower than 0. So the correct answer actually is that this is a form of tokenism. Tokenism is a form of participation where young people are invited to join a cause, they are invited to participate, but actually their voices and their opinions are not really taken into account. They don't really have any kind of decision-making power or responsibility. I see someone's written tokenism there. So yeah, this is a very non-meaningful form of participation, and one that you really you should avoid if you want to work on strengthening MYP in your work. Yeah, any last comments or thoughts from Melodi before we move on to the next case?
No, we're gonna do 4 more. Why we want you to do this is to see indeed that maybe when you read this, your feeling is this is not meaningful. But then where do you start? And here, if you can see that the decision making is probably the lowest, then maybe that's where you can start with already addressing it a little bit and then see if the things change. But we're gonna get to that in the other cases. So we're gonna do the same. And again, in case you do still want to add on something, you have questions or you don't know how to do it, put it in the chat. But other than that, move on to the next case. I saved this picture and we can share it later on. And now I'm going to clear.
All right, so let's move on to case 2. We come back to Nino again. So 6 months after the meeting on the health center, Nino is visiting the health center for an HIV test and counseling. Directly after the counseling, the NGO director approaches Nino and asks the following. Nino, I'm so happy to see you here. I need your assistance. There are some potential donors I would like to introduce you to. If you help me out, you will get this counseling for free. Because Nino can use some financial assistance, they really feel obliged to agree and come to the office of the NGO next day. Once at the meeting, Nino walks in and shakes the hand of a major donor. The director explains to the donor that 6 months ago, together with Nino's peers, Nino was actively involved in the design and development of this wonderful youth-friendly health center. The outcome of the meeting is that the NGO receives more funds for the youth programs, but Nino actually walks out without having even spoken a word. So now we'll have the graph again in front of you. Oh, I see, we have the flower. So then indeed we can recap a little bit again, the different forms. So again, you have tokenism, manipulation, youth adult partnerships, youth-led adults have no decision-making power, youth-led shared decisions with adults, adult-led shared decisions with young people, and then the lower levels of MIYP, which is where young people are informed and appointed a role, or they're informed and consulted. So now that you've had a look, yeah, let's work on the graph again. To what extent do you think the different core elements are present in this case? I see a lot of interesting things coming out of this graph as well. Very interestingly, I see that freedom of choice there's quite a lot of discrepancy. I see that some people said it's not present at all, whereas on the other hand, I see that it's somewhat present. Decision-making power, again, is not doing very well. It's actually below 0. The same goes for responsibility. I see voice and information are also present to a very low extent. So let's take a few more seconds. So this case, interestingly, seems to be doing a little bit better compared to the previous one, which is actually very interesting. And can anybody maybe point out to what form of meaningful youth participation this is? You can do so in the chat, or you can also just unmute yourself and shout it out.
You can even put a text if you want.
Mm-hmm. As you can see, very similar to case 1, freedom of choice, information, voice, responsibility, decision-making power is quite low. I see someone's written manipulation there. And indeed, you are correct. This is manipulation. This is a very non-meaningful form of participation. And actually, it's very interesting to see that in terms of choice and information, this case actually fared better than the previous one. But actually, if you look at the case, Nino did not really have a choice in this case because they were manipulated to participate. Because the director offered them free counseling and they were facing financial challenges, in that sense, they were manipulated into saying yes. In that case, it was not really freedom of choice didn't really exist in that case. And that's also like the nuance between tokenism and manipulation. On one hand, whereas tokenism happens when young people are invited to join a cause, but they're not really, their opinions are heard but not listened to. In manipulation, actually, the people who invite young people to join the cause actually also benefit from their participation, even though their participation is not meaningful. So there's kind of a malice associated with manipulation in this case. So that's and this is probably one of the worst forms of meaningful youth participation. So that's something really important to keep in mind. And if you look at some of the other core elements, Nino also did not have a voice. He was just there as a decoration to support the cause, get the NGO some money, and he actually didn't have a chance to speak. That there was no information that was shared with Nino. And so, yeah, it really fares really badly on all the core elements of participation. Yeah, any last comments on that, Melody?
No, I think it's nice to see how if you separate the things, then you can actually see that sometimes maybe from what there is a lot, but still it could lead to manipulation. But we have more cases to dig deeper into what the other differences can be. Yes. And I see people are getting more comfortable with the annotations. So also feel free to indeed put your the manipulation or tokenism or youth-led in the text box as well.
Yeah.
All right. What happens for Nino?
Let's go to the next case. And actually, we're gonna leave Nino aside for a little bit, and we're gonna come to Maya actually. So this case 3 is about Maya. Maya is a 16-year-old girl who's living in a small rural community where there's high prevalence of HIV among young people. In the past week, she's been meeting peers at a youth club where, amongst other things, she's been discussing the need for a youth-friendly health center in her village. One day, an NGO worker walks into the youth club and shares information about a youth-friendly health center they are planning to build in the near future. Hello, Maya. I would like to invite you for 3 focus group discussions to talk about the needs of the youth in relation to a youth-friendly health center. The NGO worker continues. We will provide you with information, listen to you, and try to take your thoughts and ideas into account. You will be able to make some decisions. However, we will have the main responsibility about the health center. What do you think? Are you free to join? All right. So let's recap the different meaningful forms again. I think you are becoming quite familiar with them. We already discussed tokenism and manipulation in the case studies previously. Then again, you have the lower forms, and then you have the higher forms of the MIYP. So what form of meaningful youth participation is this, and to what extent are the different core elements present in this particular case?
Let's move to the graph again then. Get your papers ready and your pens.
Some responses coming in. And again, as you're thinking about the core elements, I also encourage you to think about what form this is, and you can also indeed write it down on the graph or write it down in the chat as well. I see this one's faring quite a lot better than the previous cases, which is nice to see. I see in terms of freedom of choice, a lot of people are saying it's somewhat present to a very high level. And the same can be said about information. The same is said about voice. There's discrepancy when we look at responsibility and decision-making. I see some people score decision-making responsibility quite low, so not present at all, whereas some people voted it as quite high, which is very interesting. So what form of meaningful youth participation is this? I see someone said youth consulted. Yes, so there, if you look at the leaves of the flower again, there's two lower forms of meaningful participation. So youth are appointed to role and informed, and youth are consulted and informed. And I see one response coming in, which is that young people are consulted and informed, and that is actually the right answer. Because as you'll see from the case, if you read the case again, you'll notice that Maya was invited to the consultation. She was told exactly how many consultations she's going to be a part of, what kind of decisions are going to happen, what kind of information will be present. But on the other hand, it was also made clear that it would not be the young people, it will not be Maya who will actually take the final decision. The responsibility of the health center still lies with the adults. So she's really there as a young person who's been consulted on from a youth perspective on how the health center should be developed. So indeed, this form of meaningful participation is young people are consulted and informed. So it is not tokenism, it is not manipulation, but it is also not one of the higher forms of MYP. It's actually the lower form of MYP, which constitutes the leaves of the flower. So yeah, I see this very interesting discrepancy there. For those who ranked decision-making power high, I do encourage you to read the case study again, as you'll see that actually Maya does not have any decision-making power in this case. Yeah, any final comments, Melodi, before we move on to the next one?
No, I think we're getting the hang of it.
Perfect. All right, then let's move on. So this is case 4, and this is now we've said bye to Nino and Maya, and we've come to Choice. So Choice is involved in multiple different programs. For example, one of them is the Power to Youth program, which is actually funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the Power to Youth program aims to decrease the number of early and forced marriages, unintended teenage pregnancies, and female genital mutilation or cutting. So we work on harmful practices. The program is a joint initiative which includes Choice and 4 other adult-led partner organizations. We've joined forces, embracing our different skills and expertise to build a comprehensive program. In this program, young people are involved in every stage and at all levels of decision-making and enjoy equal decision-making power. So what form of meaningful youth participation is this, and to what extent are the core elements present in this case?
Maybe before moving to the graph, is there someone that already has an idea what it is before filling it in? Someone that wants to share their idea about it, and then we're gonna fill it in. Anyone, you can unmute, take the floor. We are very nice people. No.
I know there's, yeah, go ahead, Robin.
I am thinking a youth adult partnership.
Okay. Can you explain a bit why you think so? And then Pragya, please, respond to it.
Yeah, the reason I'm saying that is that Choice is a youth-led organization, and the consortium or coalition is formed with 4 adult-led partner organizations. So it would have to be a partnership between those 2 with having equal decision-making power. I think that's an important one to call it a youth adult partnership.
Yes, indeed. Robin is absolutely right. Maybe we could actually practice it on the graphs a little bit, because I would be curious to see, of course, like this is a youth adult partnership, but I'm curious to see how do participants today see to what extent the core elements are actually present in this case. So let's take a minute and take time to answer this question. Interesting. I see on one hand, of course, the core elements are scoring super, super high. A lot of people are saying they're present to a very high level to high level. But what about responsibility and decision making? Because this is a youth adult partnership. Do you think that young people have complete decision making power? Do you think young people have all the responsibility in this case?
Yeah, maybe to check, not to name shame people, but who had put it a bit lower, had put it very high. And I see someone in the chat saying, compared to the other examples, this one does not really make clear what actually happens or how youth are involved and participating. It's basically the definition of meaningful, inclusive youth participation. So I'm very curious to know more about an example how and why P works in this partnership. From Helen from Plan.
Thanks, Helen. Indeed, I think, again, I will want to stress there's like no one-stop solution to MYP. Of course, it depends from like context to context and case to case. In youth adult partnership specifically, I would say that the freedom of choice, information, and voice, these three core elements are super, super high. So young people have complete freedom of choice in what kind of initiatives they want to be a part of. Young people are encouraged to say no if they want to. They're also provided all the information necessary for them to be able to understand the program and participate meaningfully. And they also have a voice where we make sure that there's enough safe space for them to express themselves. But in terms of responsibility and decision making, because it's shared with adults, that scores a little bit low. But that doesn't mean that that's a bad form of MYP or it's not a meaningful form of MYP. It's just what makes that youth adult partnership equitable and equal and helps both young people and adults to work meaningfully with each other. So I hope that answers your question. And of course, if you would like to know more about youth adult partnership specifically, you can always reach out to us. We can have a full consultation and kind of help you understand more about how you can really work on strengthening youth adult partnerships in your organization, because there's a lot more that we have to share on this.
Yeah, and if I can say something to that, why I asked you first to think about it, I think what usually can happen, and let's try it for case 5 as well, is that when you kind of already have a feeling and you then start to fill in the graphs, you tend to feel it quite high because you feel it's a really good case. But when you do it the other way around, without any pre-assumptions, but just rating each element, it will give you the answer whether it is actually very meaningful or not. But that's what the entire manual and the toolkits, usually the tools are there to help you to come to a decision and not to support your decision. Yeah, the last case before moving to the inspirational speakers that we also have with us.
Yes, I'm going to quickly read it out. Sorry about the, the drilling in the background. All right. So Choice for Youth and Sexuality is an organization which advocates for the sexual and reproductive health and rights of young people across the globe. Its vision is a world where all young people have the power to make decisions about their sexual, reproductive, and love lives. From the executive director to the program coordinator to the board members, everyone with Choice is under the age of 35 years old. At every stage, be it deciding on budgets, program design, advocacy focus, governance, or human resources, young people are at the helm of decision making. So what form of meaningful participation is this? And think also again about the core elements. To what extent are the core elements present in this case? And how does it compare in terms of the other cases that we've already looked at? I also encourage you to think about what form of participation is this, and you can also, again, write it down on the graph or write it down in the chat and share it with us. All right, I see this one's faring really, really well compared to the rest of the cases. So I see that across all the core elements, they're reading quite high, from present to a very high level to present to a high level. And I see someone's just responded youth-led, which is indeed the answer. Choice is a classic example of what a youth-led organization is, of course. And so this form of participation is where all the decision-making is completely made by young people. Adults are not really part of the decision-making. It's possible that sometimes adults are consulted, but at the end of the day, it's the young people who are making the decisions. If they're running the programs, if they're deciding on budgets, they are deciding on who's, what are our priorities, how does our TOC look? So they're really, really changing the game. So yeah, I think you've all started to get a grasp of how the flower works, an idea of how the core elements work, and how they have an impact on the different forms of meaningful youth participation. So we're going to stop there with the case studies. I hope you enjoyed this exercise. And yeah, I think we're going to go into a quick Q&A before we head into a short break, I think.
Yeah. Yes, again, if you join Menti, you can ask questions, but you can also put them in the chat box. Let's have a little bit room if you have any questions for Choice, Pragya specifically to ask. I am already going to disclaim that maybe some questions are things that we could answer in a different way, but if there's any questions that are interesting to actually have them here. But in any case, put them there and we'll see how to get back to you with the answers, and some of them will be answered in this session. So if you do go to Menti, then there will be, and I'm going to open that, there is somewhere saying any questions for Choice. You can fill in your question and it will pop up on the screen and I will be sharing. I have to see if people are in there. Again, you can also put in the chat box. I think what's interesting here to see is that we've done this now around some cases, but as I said, Choice has it, but there's also other organizations having toolkits where you can actually assess your own organization, and you can then take it in very specific cases. Pick a project, sit with the actual people that are in the project and assess how you are scoring on all those elements. Let me see if anything has been put in the chats. No, and if we go to Menti, I also see that I don't see any questions in there. Just to check if maybe people are not able to do it in those ways. If anyone does still have a question, please unmute and ask your question then here. Okay, well, otherwise, then still, if you do have questions at the end of the speakers, there is another Q&A. You can then still also ask questions to Pragya. But what we have next, if we go to the next slide, what we have is what we call cup of inspiration, which is now that we've gone through this. Oh, I see that Alexander is also trying to open the Q&A. All right. If let's see, I want to give everyone like a minute or two to grab a cup of coffee if they want and chill, but I also don't want to lose people. So that's why I'm going to keep the break very short. What we have at the after the break, we have Eddie we have someone from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs talking about two examples actually of youth participation, how they are implementing it. We also have someone from the Kenya executive board, and there are two more examples that I am going to present to you. So there's three presentations of each around 6 minutes. Then we have some time for Q&A. And there's just some inspiration examples that we want to share with you. Let's say that we all take just 2 minutes, very little toilet break, or just to get a coffee or a tea. And then when you're back, we are here to give you a cup of inspirations. All right, I hope people are also getting back. So please, if you're back, put on your camera again so I can see if we do have people in the room or that you are still getting your coffee. Ah, great. I see some people putting it on. All right, for everyone that's back, please turn on your cameras again. When we have the speakers, I will spotlight them so they will come quite big, but it's always nice to see if people are here and that we can see somehow the face behind the names that we see here. Let's check how many we have in the room. All right. Yeah, let's continue. And then if people will still join in with their coffees, that's obviously very fine. I'm going to put in the chat the 3 speakers that we have. We are going to start off with Kroonema, Senior Policy Officer for Youth Education and Work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And as I said, I already did see one question coming for choice, but let's then do all of the Q&As in the end. If you have any questions, you can, when you log into Menti, there is a Q&A box open, or you can put it in the chat box. We will be collecting the questions. First, Eddie, the floor is yours. I will spotlight you so everyone knows who you are and that you are going to speak, and take us through what you want to share with us.
Thank you very much, Melodi and Partos, for having me. It is wonderful to see that you're dedicating this session to meaningful youth participation. And it's also great to see some old friends and colleagues around as well. I think the sun is also putting the spotlight on me, so I should be visible for you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm happy to provide some insights as to how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is going about meaningful youth participation. And for us, this is really part of our integrated approach called Youth at Heart, by which we invest on the one hand in the prospects of young people, their skills and jobs and entrepreneurship opportunities. And on the other hand, we aim to strengthen the voice of young people in the society and also in our own policies. So let me shortly explain why it is so important to us as a ministry. And much more could be said about it, but let's mention just 2 factors. On the one hand, many countries in which we are present with international cooperation just have a very young demographic reality. And as a ministry, we have to adapt our policies and programs to that youthful reality. And we believe that this will also make our interventions and policies much more impactful. And the second factor being, as Joyce rightfully also mentioned earlier during this session, is that it's just the right thing to do. It is indeed a human right to take part in decisions that affect people. And it's also part of the SDGs, mainly SDG 16.7 draws the attention to this important topic. Well, I was asked to share some inspiration and insights, so let me get to the point. So the first example I will give is about the Youth at Heart principles, as we call them. And they were formulated by international youth based on youth-led research and presented to us and the international community during the Youth at Heart Virtual Forum that we organized in 2020. And the principles provide 3 core messages by international youth as to how they should be and could be best supported by our ministry and many other actors so that they can thrive. And I mentioned this example as these youth-led principles have since become the basis of our international diplomacy. So we translated the messages of these youth to the basic documents that provide the inputs to what we try to convey in terms of messages internationally. And late 2021, we organized another event called the 1-year Youth at Heart event. And during this event, we reflected with our international partners and youth on what has been done since the launch of our strategy and since the virtual forum of November 2020. And I mentioned that because this is also what, in our view, meaningful is, to be transparent and accountable about what we have done with the input and ideas that were shared by youth. So this is the first example. Thank you for allowing me. The second one, and that won't surprise to those following the ministry a little bit, is that we have established our own International Youth Advisory Committee. And this committee provides a platform for ongoing dialogue and cooperation between 10 international youth and the ministry. And this goes beyond consultations. And the committee was developed together with Choice for Youth and Sexuality, hosting this session basically, and the West Wing, which is the ministry's youth think tank, and the Dutch National Youth Council. And it is operational as of November last year. And we have seen so far cooperation taking place around 7 tracks, as we call them, 7 different teams, in which colleagues from different parts of the ministry cooperate with a selection of members of the committee. And next to these 7 tracks, also many different one-off dialogues took place. For example, for the youth, the members of the Youth Advisory Committee to provide input to the policy note and the Africa strategy that are currently being written. Well, this one is a pilot. We work together with the National Youth Council, who is coordinating this platform for us. And learning is really at the core. We want to make sure that this platform is as much effective and meaningful as possible. And for that, we really try to learn along the way and adapt and improve along the way. And for us as a ministry, it will be really interesting to see how that initiative will develop in the months to come. So this is for a second example. So much more could be said about this, but let me leave it here. Not all is perfect. I want to stress that. It is work in progress to make sure that it is actually really meaningful. For the ministry, it is crucial that all of us, also during this session, present at this session, explore how we can meaningfully engage youth in a way that fits with the organization and respective mandate that we have. It's not only for the ministry, it's not only for governments. I think all of us can do our level best to make sure that our strategies, our projects, our organizations are adapted to the ones we serve, not only to see them as beneficiaries in the case of the young people, but actually to see them as the leaders and the partners that they are. So we've seen that a lot of that working on the specific challenges and opportunities of young people creates a lot of positivity, and it has this kind of multiplier effect. For example, now 5 of our embassies are also developing their youth advisory committees or youth sounding boards. There's not a blueprint, so they're open to fill it in according to what they think fits best with the context. But this has at least created this kind of ripple effect, and we are happy to see that coming about. Well, I leave it there. Thank you so much, Melodi, once again for having me, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Eddie. Are there any questions? Anything that you want to ask Eddie, put it in the chat box, please. Thank you for sharing these 2 examples. And well, as I told you, we're not gonna fully do that when you look at those graphs, but you were also with us. What do you think is, so like, for example, the youth of heart, if you look at those elements, I don't know if you still can bring them back in your memory. What do you think is the one that is the highest, what makes youth at heart such a meaningful example?
Yeah, our strategy, I think it's that it does not only focus on prospects of young people, but that it's indeed also really focusing on the wider position in politics and society. These are 2 sides of the same coin in our view, and you often see donors or governments focusing just or solely on entrepreneurship or skills or job provision, and forget about the meaningful participation in decision making, and that especially counts in many different countries where there is a kind of a gap. And not only a gap in terms of matching skills and jobs, but also a gap in terms of the youthful reality and those in power that are often a bit older, and the realities of the people that are making the decisions are sometimes really different from the realities of the young people that they are also elected to serve, and drawing the attention to that and having this kind of dialogue, government to government, but also, of course, civil society towards the government and everybody together, I think is really crucial to make sure that in the end, the demographic dividend, as it is often called, which is indeed there, is harnessed, and that indeed youth can participate in economy, in society. So you need both. And I think that is the strength of our strategy that we have.
Yeah, and actually following up on that, I see a question in the chat. which I think follows up very well, is how do you make sure that there is then the mobilizing environment? So how do you hold the adults in your institution accountable, and is bureaucracy a big issue in your context? Question.
Yeah. It's a good question, and I think that yes, it is. It is not always easy, as I think it was mentioned earlier during this session as well. It is not about per se about the voices of young people, but about others being able and interested to listen, basically. And yeah, that sometimes needs education of let's say the adults in the room, and we've seen that also, of course, in our ministry, that we've put our level best to make sure that everybody who should be on board in this initiative, in creating this platform, is on board, and that goes up to senior leadership level within the ministry, as well as, of course, the minister. But at the same time, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We really hope that, having established this platform and having this cooperation now between international youth and our ministry, but also at our embassies, the decision makers and policy makers start to reap the fruits and see the benefit of it and the logic of it, of doing it, benefiting from the out-of-the-box ideas, benefiting from first-hand stories that can really serve as inspiration to the policies that we make, and to have this bigger connection between the policies and what is actually happening on the ground. So yeah, this needs translation, this needs patience, and it's, as I said, not perfect, it's a work in progress, but learning by doing. I really believe we get there, and I see it happening. Yeah.
Great, thanks for giving those insights also on the challenges I think that will come when you work on trying to implement as much meaningful institutions or processes or systems that you try to. Thanks for sharing, Eddie, and for everyone. We don't have indeed a lot of slides because I think it's also nice to just be inspired, but when we will send you a PDF where you can find a link to the Youth at Heart, but also other examples that are going to be shared. Then I think, okay, a very quick question I see. In which embassies do you have those sounding boards? Is a question from Nina from Oxfam for you, Eddie. And then we'll move to the next speaker.
So yeah, good question. We have in Kampala, Uganda, and Niger. Burkina Faso is working on it. Jordan is working on it. And one more, I think it was Mozambique, if I'm not mistaken. And some others are also exploring, like Lebanon, they're exploring on how they can do it. So this is also a work in progress. It's ongoing. And we also try to facilitate, of course, exchange between our different embassies on how to go about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Eddie. And also thank you for the questions. Then let's move on. Just sharing the screen very quickly for our next speaker. And let me also have a spotlight you now. Sorry, I'm replacing you, Eddie. Going on to the next speaker from the Kenyan Youth Advisory Board. Yeah, please introduce yourself and let us know why this is also such an example that we really need to share with everyone on MIYP.
Thank you, Melodi. Hi everyone. My name is Mariah. I am part of the Youth Executive Board in Kenya. I am so glad to be here, and it's quite an honor to have been picked to share some of the success stories here. So the Youth Executive Board, number one, is at the apex of implementation of the Right Here, Right Now 2 project here in Kenya. So the project is being implemented in 3 counties out of 42 counties. That is Kisumu, Nairobi, and Mombasa. And so the Youth Executive Board is composed of three young people from 3 different counties. So it has a total of 9 people. And we also have a diversity in the young people. We have a PWD representative, LGBTIQ persons, and we also have people from the gender minority in the program within the board. So what exactly do we do? So number one, we work directly with the secretariat of the program together with the partners, and we advise the coalition on approaches that they can use to meaningfully and inclusively engage the young people to ensure that SRHR and essentially CSC is reaches the target audience of the young people. We also advocate for the increased inclusion of young people in the different levels of decision making during the project implementation. And so what we do is we share input. So when the partners, for example, develop their work plans yearly, there are 7 partners. When they develop their work plans, it has to pass through us as the board so that we're able to see is what the objectives or what they want to achieve. Say they want to have activities and their work plans essentially for the whole year. It has to pass through the board, and we see if they tick the boxes that are supposed to be. If not, the partners have to redo it. We also share input for young people, the input of young people, at the local, at the international, and also at the international levels, to just increase the voices of the young people on dialogues about SRHR and the issues that Right Now 2 program hopes to tackle. We also promote the youth participation input in the Right Now, work through mobilizing young people to just participate in the activities. We also do mobilization for the audience and attendees for the activities that the implementing partners also are doing. And we also do feedback sessions through surveys to just capture the perceptions of the young people who have attended the engagement, and do they feel that it was a youth adult partnership, they feel like their voices was heard, or they were just there, just as a flower. And we also engage the youth regionally to ensure that the issues that affect the young people are captured, and we make recommendations to programs. So that's essentially what we do in a nutshell, but it's not been easy. In Right Now 1, there was no youth executive board. So it was just brought on board in the picture in the Right Now 2. So we do have a number of challenges. And for one, the youth executive board does not work independently, and we have to pass our voice to the partners through the secretariat, which is the National Coalition Path Coordinator and the M&E person. So as the board, we cannot go directly to the implementing partners and tell them, what, this activity that you want to do cannot be done because we feel this and this criteria has not been met. So we have to pass through the secretariat. And sometimes we are told on short notice of the program of activities that the partners want to do. But ideally, we should be told, in advance, so that we confirm that everything they want to do aligns with Right Now 2 policies. But sometimes some of the implementing partners give us short notice, and so we are not able to give constructive feedback before the activity is done. We also do not have a decision-making power directly, as I mentioned. We can check what they want to do, but we cannot directly tell them don't do it. We just influence, decision. So we do not have a decision-making power. Equally, some of the implementing partners, for example, touch on minorities such as the LGBTIQ, and they are really closed-faced people, and they do not outrightly bring out the activities they want to do, and that makes some part of the youth executive board feel sidelined. As I mentioned, the executive board has people from different diversity. So you find that activities that, for example, is being carried out with the PWDs, they will only want to engage with the PWD person, representative from the youth executive board, but ideally that should not be the case. We also have a really slow feedback mechanism for the youth executive board. As I mentioned, we have to pass through channels, but so far it has been a good journey. We have been able to work with the implementing partners really well, and to just share our voices and bring in the young people's perspective. And maybe something else that has equally helped us is that the formation of the youth executive board is part of the structure that Right Now 2 Kenya is working with. So we cannot have a Right Now 2 without the youth executive board. Yeah, so that's another reason we have been successful. Yes, I'm going to share the link to the Youth Executive Board shortly. Let me just do it right now. Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks for sharing this. And I do have a question, but first checking, well, for other people, please put in your questions. And you did share with us also the challenge. I'm also wondering to, I can imagine that to get to this point, there are also other steps that you could take. What is something that you want to maybe give away to other partnerships that are here present? And maybe having a youth executive board is few steps too far. What would you say is the first thing that they could do in order to enable an opportunity to at some point have an executive board maybe?
Well, number one, for the formation of the Youth Executive Board, as I mentioned earlier, it's in the policy guidelines. The terms of reference were already drafted, and there were certain categories that someone had to pass for them to be a Youth Executive Board. Number one, you cannot be anything above 23 years. Number two, you cannot have a direct association or link with the implementing partners. And you also need to be a young person who has been in the SRHR field for a minimum of 1 year. So number one, draft a policy in your organizations or the umbrella board that is handling the program, and then so for me to join and therefore for the rest of the Youth Executive Board, we had to do an interview. You had to bring in your CV, and then you do a panel interview, just like you're applying for a job, because we take the Youth Executive Board as something very serious, and it was not about handpicking young people. We had to go through an interview. Yeah. And then being intentional about involving the Youth Executive Board in your activities, and in all activities that the implementing partners have, there has to be a Youth Executive Board member present in that activity. And at the end of the activity, you do a report of what exactly happened and the recommendations that you would, want the implementing partner to bring in the picture when they're doing an activity. So if as a Youth Executive Board, I come to an activity, and I feel the young people there were just there for show, that's one of the things that I will put in my recommendations. That, I think you guys had an activity, but the activities was, it was not a safe space for people. For example, if it's an activity with the PWDs and you find that the environment was not conducive, for example, it was in a building and there was no lift for the young people, it was a struggle for them to get there. So we give recommendations based on the activities that have happened and also on what should happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, I see here. What about people with disabilities? What do you do to make sure you're fully inclusive in the board? I mean, so I think that the question is more to be, how do you make sure that you're as inclusive as possible within the board?
So as I mentioned, so the implementing partners are 7, and there's one implementing partner called Dream Achievers Youth Organization that's based in Mombasa, and their key focus on what they bring to the coalition is inclusivity, or in terms of PWDs. So in part of the Youth Executive Board, we have someone who represents the PWDs, and when the application was sent out, the PWDs were asked to, they were encouraged to apply, and in picking them, a PWD was selected. The board cannot run minus the representation from those minority. Yeah.
And then I also see another questions. I think it's also an interesting one, because we talked what is not MIYPs when there is no compensation. So the question is, do the participants in the Youth Executive Board actually receive compensation for their time and expenses to participate?
Yes, I want to say yes, we do. And it's very intentional in the sense that we receive the same compensation and remuneration that the staff, the implementing partners are receiving. For example, if there's a trip and there's an activity, say, and people need to go by flight, the young people in the Youth Executive Board are not going to be put on load for 6 hours, yet the staff are flying. So all of us fly, all of us receive the same reimbursement, all of us sleep in the same hotel. The treatment is fair and it's 100. No one gets an age because maybe there are staff or there are adults and we are young people. No, everyone gets the same compensation. So, and that's really something that I must say Kenya is doing really well. You will not, go to maybe an activity and find that its accommodation has been booked, but some people are sleeping, in a 2-star hotel while others are sleeping in a 5-star hotel. We all sleep in the same hotels, we all eat the same meals, and there's equal treatment for everyone. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thanks for sharing. And okay, one more last question then, and then we will be moving to the next inspiration. Is the selection also vetted by an outside party? And if someone has graduated from the threshold age by a few months into their tenure in the board, what happens?
So in our terms of reference, it's very clear you cannot be part of the youth executive board if you are past 23 years. So it has to be 23 years as at the time you are applying, and it's a contract you renew yearly. So if I am 23 this year, next year I will not be viable to reapply. And equally, you cannot do more than 2 terms. If you reapply this year, next year, then you give chance to another young person. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks again. And again, if there's still a question popping up for Eddie or for Ava or still for Choice, bring them on. I wanted to move on to 2 more examples I am going to share with you myself. Alexander, if you can put for those, I do have one of the one slide. What I want to share with you is the position of the youth investor on sexual reproductive health and rights. As I said prior, indeed, and I think in 2018, that was a role that I took on. Here you actually see a picture of Sana. I'm actually wondering if she's also with us, actually. She was the one before me, and I think we are at this moment, number 5 is, or 6 maybe even is in this role. Why I'm sharing this role is because this is also an example of how you can implement youth participation in a meaningful way. This role is an independent role, and it is kind of a collaboration between Choice for Youth and Sexuality and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And obviously, I think you can all also imagine from the moment that it started in the beginning, that it wasn't as meaningful as it is today. I think that's also how you can see that it's kind of the position is being co-created throughout the years, with each youth investor taking on a specific part that they really fought for to make it more equal. One of the years it was maybe more the compensation, the other year it was more the terms of decision making. And it was really interesting for me to do this role, but also talk with the other people that did it in this role, is to when you start doing this, and I think everyone had good intentions, but you find your challenges in all of the elements that we actually discussed. Are you given the information on time? Are you actually able to make decisions? Or are you put more at the table, even by people that intentionally want to meaningfully engage you? In my year, we also talked a lot around compensation in order to make it as equal as possible. But what I like about this is that it makes, because you're independent and because you are between two, you're between the diplomatic, bureaucratic system, but also the more activistic organization Choice for Youth and Sexuality, there is some room to find how you want to influence the policy making, but also reach out to communities and make sure that implementing programs are in the most participatory way, specifically on youth. So yeah, well, what I love about this is that it shows how it can also evolve. I think we are getting more and more to a point where the role is more integrated and is as meaningful as possible. But it also shows, and I think Pragya also said that, I don't think we all have to have the intention or the goal to always have a youth adult partnership or a fully youth-led organization. But I think it's really good to be mindful of when you are in a lower form of youth participation. And if that's the only goal you have, I think that's fully fine. So I think within this role, there is a lot of responsibility and voice and decision making, but sometimes you're not giving enough information, and sometimes you don't have a lot of decision making power. But you are put in a position of power to voice and kind of represent, or at least advocate for youth on sexual reproductive health and rights. This is a role that I think it's still actually quite unique. Back in the days, it was unique. I think more countries are, I know that a few years ago, Mozambique also really tried to see if this is something they could maybe adapt but in their own context, in their own manner. But I think it's interesting to see that these kind of ways are also possible when you talk about governance structure. So we talked about the Youth at Heart, Eddie talked about it. We talked about the West Wing also with a think tank, but also the executive board, and this could also be one. And then the next example that I want to share is a Dutch example. So I don't have a slide or anything on that. It's called Platform 2100. And the idea is, and I want to share with you because I still think it's a really interesting one. I will put the link in it. It is Dutch. So yeah, and I'm actually a bit confused why there's not an English version on the website yet. But I like the idea that we all know that in the future, if you want, slogans like youth is the future, then how can we prepare them to actually take on more executive and board roles? So what they've done is on that platform, they've combined a lot of adults that are currently in boards or in advisory boards and executive boards. And they've also collected a lot of young people that have that ambition or potential, but maybe are not currently in a position to be at a board. The idea is that there is also a schooling, an academy for them. They learn a lot from each other. This already will, I think, get rid of a lot of assumptions around whether young people are able to and whether adults are making room. So the entire platform in itself is I think, a good awareness tool. But the idea is also that at some point, there are no excuses anymore to say why you don't have a young person in a board, because they are being prepared and they are ready to be put in positions of power. And I think it is interesting to see, this is more of an open brainstorming thing. It is interesting to see whether a platform like that could be developed for the international development. As you are here at Strategic Lab of Partos, that is bringing innovation within the international development. I think a lot of times we do struggle to find young people, to consult them, to inform them, to engage them, but even more so to put them in our boards, in our advisory boards. I think an example is, if I'm correct, that Partos, for example, does have a young person within the board. I know Rutgers also does that, and probably a lot of more examples that I don't know of. But it is interesting to see whether there could be a platform where you can find those people and that they are kind of taught and they are learning from the ones that have to make room. That's why I wanted to share it as an inspiration of maybe this is a place we could go to as international development aid, having the ambition to put more people in the boards as well. Yeah, I'm curious to, if there's any questions about these roles, of course, please put them again in the chat. I see a question about more practically. Yes, there is a recording of the meeting and it will be shared afterwards. If there are no more questions, then before going to the last part, there was one question for choice that I saw a bit late. So I do want to, Pragya, ask you to answer that question before I'm going to move to getting a bit more concrete, but we'll get to that. The first question for you, Pragya, is what is the difference actually between partnerships and decision-making sharing? Seems to be depending on the partnership. Can you respond to that?
Thanks, Melodi. I indeed, I think from my understanding of the question, I think the question is because obviously there's multiple forms of youth participation, as we've seen in the flower. And I think two of them can be quite similar and confusing. So one of them, of course, is youth-adult partnerships, and the other one is a form where the form is adult-led, but the decisions are shared with young people. And I think in this sense, you really need to look at decision-making and responsibility. So in youth-adult partnerships, decision-making and responsibility is quite equal. It might not be at the highest level, but young people and adults share the same decision-making responsibility. So they make decisions together. Young people don't have the upper hand, neither do adults. But in an adult-led situation where the decision-making is shared with young people, it's possible that young people are consulted, are part of the decision-making, but actually the adults have an upper hand and they are actually make the final decision. So that's essentially the difference. It again boils down to the level or the extent to which decision-making and responsibility is implemented in that program or organization. And so that's indeed the nuance between multiple forms of meaningful youth participation. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Pragya. I see Lisa Lichtering from Wemos has raised a hand. Please go ahead.
Hi, yes, I had a question and I thought about writing it down, but I thought it would take too long. I think Haway touched upon it a little bit, and for starters, it was really nice to get a nice refresher of meaningful youth participation. I think this meeting is also a bit of a choice reunion in a way, so it's nice to see some people online again. I think I think in reality, we always find that it becomes a little bit more messy with youth participation than some of the examples that we saw. And I think one issue that I guess in my work we're trying to solve is how do you deal with the fact that a lot of young people that we're trying to engage are still, or that the youth engagement we do in practice are still young people that are in some way from more privileged backgrounds, higher educated, well-connected, richer, sort of all these different things. And has Choice already thought through a way of also how you can assess sort of that level of participation in, yeah, like Robin is saying, the usual suspects, how you can assess that participation in your programs or activities? Because I think that's another aspect of it being meaningful.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, for that question. I think it's a very valid concern, and I'm glad that you and your organization is perhaps raising it. I think something that we very, very briefly mentioned, but didn't really deep dive into during the session was indeed the preconditions of youth participation. As you might have seen in the flower, they are represented by the air and the sun and the water. And I think having those preconditions in place really makes youth participation truly meaningful. And specifically when we're talking about preconditions, there's multiple ways, there's multiple components to it. But I think one important thing that organizations can do is actually make sure that there is, for example, commitment from organizations or commitment from adults towards meaningful youth participation. Commitment it's a big term, but what does commitment mean? It could mean multiple things. So you could, for example, have a dedicated budget that is dedicated solely to fund youth programs, but not only fund youth programs, also have youth at the forefront of these programs. And of course, as you mentioned, a lot of young people who are involved in these programs perhaps come from privileged backgrounds. So it's important that you are compensating them equitably and fairly, and the same as other staff members, other adults in the organizations. You're also making sure that there's enough capacity strengthening opportunities for them. You're helping them develop their skills, hone their skills, and you can do this by creating mentorship roles between adult staff members and younger staff members. Yeah, I think I spoke about budget and financial means already. I think safe space also comes into play. So make sure that there's a safe space for young people to be able to voice their concerns, because obviously a lot of young people, also have responsibilities. Young people go to schools. A lot of young people, especially in the regions that we work with, actually could be responsible, already have families, for example, that they have to be responsible for. So it's important that organizations do take that into consideration. And like I said, I think we didn't deep dive into the preconditions during the session, but at Choice we do have recommendations and suggestions and ways in which organizations can include these preconditions already in their organizations, make them part of their programs, so that young people are meaningfully supported. I think that is what makes it meaningful for young people, only when you have these preconditions in place and you have these core elements in place. So I think there's definitely more to discuss on this. And if you have more questions, I encourage you to please reach out to us and we can definitely talk more about this.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I also see how you're reacting to it in the chat. And I also saw someone, Ludmila, sharing the checklist from Unoy. This one is actually going to be shared with you. Maybe if I can react to it very briefly before moving, because actually what we do want to move on to is the commitments. I think what you said, Lisa, makes sense. there's a few things that I want to share. So for example, having this meeting with a lot of people here, I hope that a lot of people are here that are not already aware of the importance, relevance, and the how-tos of MIYP. But I think in reality, we do see that a lot of times when there is a meeting on MIYP, program officers are probably that working on youth sent to these kind of meetings. So this is also one of those things when you talk about how to make sure that more people are aware of it. I think this is one of the very most important things. How can you, already knowing this, next to your job, probably that you're trying to implement it in the most meaningful way and you're trying to learn more and more, how can you make sure that more people are interested to joining these kind of meetings, not even implementing, not even reassessing and filling in those graphs, but just joining these kind of meetings? Or how could you organize such a meeting within your own organization that it's maybe a bit more tailor-made, but getting more people interested in why they actually should join these kind of meetings. The second thing I want to say, if you talk about indeed, I think everyone here knows, is when you talk about young people as a big group, this is what happens. Then you will get the most privileged ones, the most vocal ones, the most outspoken ones, because that's always what happens in communities and in systems. And when we don't look at them as, well, like half of the people in the population, which the other people we do kind of still put in little boxes or try to at least frame them to make sure that we can include them all. So I think those are really challenges. And I think Haway is also saying that it is unfortunately that sometimes even maybe young people are not interested in SRHR. So it's hard to first make them interested, make them aware, and then also engage them and then make sure there is reimbursement. And there's obviously a lot of challenges and elements involved. But we're not going to leave you with this. What we kind of did is we started with like, what is MIYP? And as I think Pragya also said, usually from Choice, it's a 3-day training. From other organizations, it's also multiple day trainings. We did it in a very short amount of time. And now we kind of came into how can you find out which element you can take. In my introduction, I think I also mentioned that what I do as a consultant for 10 years is try to make things pragmatic and concrete. So now I'm curious to kind of move to, are there any commitments that you could make now? And with commitments, I don't mean making sure that your program is more meaningful, but small commitments that you could make. For example, organize a brown bag meeting on MIYP, but frame it differently so more people will join that won't join for an MIYP session, and maybe consult an organization to help you out, or use some of the links that we will share later on with you to also share it there. This is one thing that I wanted to say, but let's go to the commitments. Alexander, if you can show the last slide we have. These are some recommendations or like commitments, ideas for commitments that Choice has put in. And then we have a few more small questions also for evaluating on Menti with you. And then it's time for the little surprise for you to end this meeting. The commitments are going to show up here. Pragya, for you to take us through the commitments that Choice wants to make for the people here.
Thanks, Melodi. Indeed, I think as Melodi mentioned, these are some quick or small commitments that you can make. I think we have a whole plethora of suggestions and recommendations for you, but these are some things that you can really like concretely do even tomorrow. So the first thing that you can do is you can reach out to Choice or another youth expert that you might be familiar with, that you've worked with before. Also perhaps somebody from your local partners or from the regions that you work with. Reach out to a youth expert for a training on youth participation, of basic training on youth participation. It could be indeed, like Melodi mentioned, it could be a brown bag lunch, it could be a 3-day training, it could be a 1-day training. Just take that initiative to understand what is youth participation and why is it so important for your work. So that's really the first step. The next thing that you can do is read more about the flower of participation. I think you've been introduced to it today. Like I said, it was a very, very brief presentation. There's so much more to it, and there's so much more information on it about the core elements, preconditions, the different forms. And I think it's a great tool, not just for adults, but also for young people to understand more about what does youth participation mean and how can you strengthen it. And I think somebody was asking me in the chat today if it's also available in different languages. We also have the narrative of the flower in French, so you can also find that on our websites. We also have a full-fledged training on MIYP in French. So that's also something that we can talk about a little more, if that's something interesting or that's something that's relevant for you and your partners. The third one, we've also already mentioned a little bit. I think it's easy to commit. It's easy to say that we wanna work on meaningful youth participation. We wanna make a change, but sometimes it's hard because you realize that you never have enough budget or capacity dedicated to this work. So make sure that you're having this conversation within your organization. If you're a manager, make sure that you are making sure that this is part of the programs you're developing. If you're part of the leadership of an organization, make sure that apart from just having a policy document or having a commitment to MIYP, you also have enough budget and enough personnel in the organization who are working on meaningful youth participation. And then dedicate this budget to make yourself more aware about MIYP, increase your knowledge on MIYP, and have discussions on MIYP. The fourth one, I think Haway presented a perfect example of, was to co-create programs together with youth and hold meaningful and inclusive consultations with young people that you work with. There's multiple ways you can do that. You could work with youth advisory board, youth executive boards. You could work with staff members who run who are young people. There's multiple different ways of doing this as well, but it's important that young people are engaged in the conversations, are part of decision making, especially if it's decisions that impact their lives. And then the last one is really important one, is invest in time, capacity building, as well as trust building with youth partners. I think, of course, we live in a world where the generational gap is growing day by day, and I think for a lot of adult-led partners, I think there is the intention to make change, but they always struggle with how to do that. How do they get young people on board? How do they meaningfully engage them? But I think that always comes with time. You need to be really, you need to have a commitment to it. You need to make sure there's budget for it, and that there's also like that willingness to work with youth partners and build that trust and take them along, because young people do have specific needs. So it's always good to be mindful that there will be efforts need to be made to dedicate yourselves to meaningful participation. But it's not impossible. There's multiple organizations that we work with who are doing this, and we've been supporting them. So don't be afraid to just reach out to us, and we're going to have a conversation on this. So yeah, I hope these are some helpful commitments that you can take along in your organization. Hand it back to Melodi.
Thank you. The very, very last part, one more time to Menti, because I am actually curious what we could commit to, and also we want to get some of your feedback, of course, on the session. So if you could join us for the very last 6 minutes on Menti by using the QR code or going to Menti. I'll leave it for a few more seconds. Then the first question I have for you is actually, what can you commit to? So you can see there is a few, there's the things that Pragya said, and I put one more thing, and maybe the easiest step usually is when you are inspired to organize a certain session for other people. And as I said, what I've learned is to frame it differently in order to make sure that people, the unusual suspects will join. Always feel free, I think, to reach out to indeed like Choice or Unoy or any independent consultants working on this, to think along with you how you can frame it, how you can organize it. What are people committing to? I see quite a lot to make sure there is enough budget. I hope that you then kind of also know the action that it takes. Maybe sit down with your finance, or if there is a program that you know of, like, hey, we need a lump sum there, to make sure that there is money in there. Still a lot on the budget. Some people reaching out.
You can only select one, right?
You can only select one, yeah, because I think if we pick one, maybe we'll actually do it in the coming week. That's a little bit of my dominant power as a facilitator, to not give you a lot of freedom of choice. But yeah, feel free to do all 6 or even more. But I hope that for the people here, that you can actually commit and maybe put for yourself, like for the coming month, before the end of May, I've done this commitment for myself. Let's see, invest in time, capacity building, as well as trust building with youth partners. think that's always one of the challenges, right? Budget and time are always the ones that come most often. Just waiting for a few more people to fill it in to see what we can commit to. Also quite a lot to read more about flower participation. As I said, it will be shared with you. So with just one click, you know where to get all your information to dive deeper. Yeah, more people are joining. I'll give it 30 more seconds. And then I can already ask you the next questions for the ones that have filled it in. I'm curious to hear, when you're making this commitment or any other commitment that you have in your head now, what support would you need in order to make that commitment happen? Because yeah, as I said, this is a learning, innovation and learning strategic lab. Maybe there are things that someone here can help you out with, or a role that partners could take, or any other organization. What kind of, so I'm moving on to the next one. What do you need as support in order to commit to any of your commitments or to more MYP within your partnership? Please fill it in as open as you can. And yeah. Something that we could take along with us to maybe support you with, or maybe there is a certain session that needs to be organized for you. And maybe for the ones still thinking about it, if it could be anything support that could be that's, yeah, would we, I mean, like Partos or consultants or Choice or Unoi could give you. So maybe not things that you need as support within your organization, but what could help you to get that support from your organization. So I see here a Zoom training for internship base and materials. Yeah, so maybe like a pre-recorded webinar that you could always share as an onboarding for new people if there's a lot of turnover on what is MYP. Commitment from leadership, curious to hear, like, is there something we could do to help you get more commitment from your leadership? Ideas for insightful sessions to organize for the partnership. I will take that into account and when we share something with you. Yeah, I see someone is expanding on the commitment from leadership, higher level commitment. Partners could create tailored, easy to digest awareness creation packages, training, targeting CEOs and directors. Yeah, so some sort of communication tools in order to to make the board, the CEOs or the directors more aware. I think that's a really nice suggestion. Thank you. Yeah, keep filling it in. Yeah, and how to think to get the unusual suspects. I think more people are still typing. Don't want to keep a lot of the other people also waiting, and I don't want to go too much over time. So please keep fitting your things, but I think Alexander shared it all the way in the beginning. You can subscribe to the newsletter to get more of the trainings and the session, everything that's happening from Partos, and keep filling this in, because I can take this into account when sharing a document with you, that some of these things are maybe in there. Some of the things that you're suggesting already exist and could be shared with you. I see here tools to share information and strengthen capacities. So before moving to, there's a few more questions, just more on the feedback of the session, but the little present that we had for you at the end, I call it a digital goodie bag. I will be putting it in the chat box meanwhile, and afterwards it will be sent to you with the links of also the things that the speaker shared with you. Our digital goodie bag is something that I've put some things that you can watch, some things that you can read, and some things that you can do in order to dive deeper into MYP with links that you can click on. I will be putting it in the chat box, but it will be also shared with you afterwards. And then we can move to the actual feedback. As it says, the first question, on a scale from 1 to 5, to what extent has your knowledge on MYP improved as a result of this session? Please fill this in. It's also interesting for us to know if we had the people here that maybe already know this, are advocates and are interested to always learn more, or if you also had some people that came in maybe a bit more less experienced or less knowledge about MYP and learned a bit more. I'll give you a few more seconds while I will share the digital goodie bag in the chat box with you. Okay, moving on to the next question. What is your key takeaway that you will do differently in your work, if you have one? And then I'm going to share the PDF, because on the picture you can't click on the links. So in the chat box, you'll find a PDF where there is links for things to dive deeper into MYP for you. And then let's have this as our very last question. And then I want to just give the floor for the last minute to Frederic to close up the meeting. I want to thank everyone for also being very engaging and interactive and filling in the graphs with us, having all your questions. And also a big thank you for Choice, but also our speakers, Eddie and Haba. And you will, as I said, receive more of the information, but without anything else, I want to pass it on to Frederic.
Thank you, Melody. Well, wow, that was a great session, I have to admit. A massive thank you to all the presenters for their inspiring presentations. To you, Melody, for your great facilitation, and actually to all of you for your active participation and engagement. I would like to let all of you know that at Partos, we would like to explore how we as a sector can better support young professionals in their professional growth, and hence we will organize a first brainstorm session in the summer. So if you're interested to brainstorm jointly, please drop me an email. I will share my email in a few seconds. Yeah, and for now, thanks again, and please do not forget to subscribe to our newsletter. Oh, I can see my email has been shared already, so you know where to find me.
So for the ones that are still in Menti, we had, I think, 2 more questions. Feel free to still fill them in, because it is interesting feedback for us. But I also want to, leave the people that really have to leave. Please feel free to leave. Thanks again. I think you have the link to subscribe to the newsletter. You have the email form, Frederic, to email her. And if you are still here with us, then we do have, I think, 2 more questions, is that we know what you like the most and what is the thing we could change about these sessions. So for the ones remaining with us, feel free to please give us this feedback. All right, just moving to the very last one, if you can give us any suggestion for improvement. And yeah, once again, thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.